All right, welcome back to another episode of the American Man podcast. We're going through the Bill of Rights, and we are on the Fifth Amendment. So, Elijah, why don't you go ahead and read the Fifth Amendment?
It's pretty long. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offence to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation.
All right, so a lot of parts to that one, so we'll kind of unpack that one at a time. The first portion of this: no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in land, naval forces, or militia, when in the actual service time of war or public danger. That's basically saying, in order to arrest you and charge you with a crime, there has to be a probable cause statement of some sort. Um, and what they have different methods of doing this now, either a warrant or they have what's called a grand jury. The grand jury is a group of people that meets, and they hear evidence from a prosecutor, and they decide whether or not that evidence is enough even to charge someone, not whether they're guilty or not, but whether or not they think there's enough evidence just to even arrest them or have an investigation and charge them with the crime. So again, when we look at context for these things, in times of the king, it would just be, the king or the, sheriff or the deputy or whoever would just say, I don't like this person. I'm throwing them, and I don't like what they said about me. I don't like what they're, all about. So I'm just going to throw them in jail. There was no, we say due process. This is commonly though. Each amendment typically gets a nickname, or parts of each amendment get a nickname. This is the due process clause. Um, and so, we can't just, our government can't just throw people in jail for indefinite period of time without a good reason for it. Now, there's these exceptions in there for if you're in the military. We have what's called a court martial, or in times of war. We've suspended in the past. We've suspended these rights, like during the Civil War, where people could be arrested and tried and things like that without the indictments. But it's pretty rare. It would be difficult for that to be done today. So then it says, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. What does that sound like to you?
Like, uh, is this put in jail?
Well, it's being
Or
found guilty of something, or being charged with something. So let me put it this way. Let's say that I thought you were taking cookies from the cookie jar, right? And I put forth all my evidence. I said, Elijah, he likes cookies a lot, and there's some missing cookies, and so I think he took them. Let's say then Mama said, well, that's not enough evidence. What if then I just kept on bringing it up? Well, I think Elijah took them because he likes cookies and there's missing cookies. And I just kept on bringing it up. Would that feel fair? Would that feel right? Until eventually Mama just said, fine, Elijah took them. Punish Elijah.
well, maybe I didn't do it.
Yeah, maybe you didn't do it. And it's something that we had already discussed. We'd gone through it. It didn't seem like my evidence was good enough. So why should I be able to keep bringing that up over and over and over and over again? So what would happen, um, back in these times is you might be found not guilty, of treason or some crime against the king or
And
something,
then
and then they would charge you with the same exact thing and get a new jury, and then they might find you guilty for it. So once there has been a case against you for a particular crime, they can't bring the same case against you for the same crime. That's called double jeopardy. And
unless you've done it again.
unless you've done it again, different facts, different circumstances. So we have this rule. The government can't just keep bringing the same charges against you, hoping that, well, this time maybe we'll get them, right? So that's why it's really important for the government to have all of the evidence, or as much of it as possible before they even bring the charges, um, because they only really get one shot at this. Now, there's a little bit of confusion with people as to what can be criminally charged twice, and a lot of the confusion comes from the fact that the state and the federal government are two different things. So you might be able to, you might, if you got charged with some sort of murder charge, or embezzlement that was across state lines, and let's just say the federal government for whatever reason charged you with murder, and you were found not guilty. The state could then, let's say you did it in Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin could come and charge you with murder if it happened within the state. That's not double jeopardy. This only applies to the entity that is charging you.
So you can be charged once federal, once state.
If there is a federal crime and a corresponding state crime for the same actions, that's correct. Yeah. Now, there's not, we generally leave the policing powers to the states. So if you commit a murder in, let's just say, Wisconsin, there was nothing to do with federal property, federal employees. You didn't cross state lines. Everything was sort of contained within Wisconsin. It wasn't gang related. It wasn't, there's different. It wasn't on Native American reservation. There's these different things that can get it into federal court. Typically, a crime like that, you can only be charged in the state court because there's no federal crime for doing that unless it involves one of those other things that we talked about. So that's the double jeopardy clause. Then it goes on to say, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. Okay, so what does that sound like?
So, you shouldn't be allowed to force someone to admit it or whatever.
Exactly. Why do you think that was important to the founding fathers?
Because, well, probably in England, if you, even if you're you were a lot of the time forced into doing that. So you're tortured even into committing it, or not committing, confessing.
Exactly. So what would happen is they would coerce or torture a confession out of a person. And even after this amendment was put into place, the courts have had to really crack down over the years of what counts as a valid confession versus not a valid confession. We actually have these rules. We have to read some. It's called their Miranda rights, and it comes from a case out of Arizona v. Miranda, where this guy, his last name was Miranda, and they arrested him, and he told them a bunch of stuff. He confessed to some things, but then later the court said he didn't have an attorney with him. He didn't know he was allowed to be, to withhold information or not talk to the police, things like that. He didn't know his rights. So now, and you'll see this in movies and things like that, where the cops will be arresting someone and they'll say, you have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, An attorney will be provided for you. They have this whole long list of things that they actually read like word for word from this card now. And it's because of that. We don't want people to feel forced or coerced into a confession. And yes, back in really old days, it was literally tortured. They would beat someone, they would torture them, they would break their fingers, all these different things until they confessed or admitted to something that they didn't do. We had a lot of that in this country, even after this law was passed, after the Fifth Amendment. They just weren't as I'll say overt about the types of torture, or they would what they would do is they would maybe lock someone in a cell for 10 hours without food or water or bathroom or anything like that, and then they come in and say, "Are you ready to talk yet? Are you ready to tell us what you did?" And they would kind of maybe not directly torture someone. And there were also instances where law enforcement did, use physical violence against people. So the Supreme Court has had to make a lot of rulings on this Fifth Amendment as to what it means. So in any case where you're a witness, if you think that it's something that was illegal, you don't have to admit to it. So then the next case, or in the next line, says, "Nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." So this is expanding it a little bit. So what if I come to your house? I'm the government, and I say, "I want your house. I'm going to take your house." It's probably not okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they say, I need your car. I'm going to take your car. I want your car. Is that okay? And then, of course, life and liberty. So that's locking you up or executing you or something like that. Life, liberty, or property without due process of law. What does due process mean?
I was going to ask you that question.
Yeah, due process is sort of this broad term that we use to define fairness in the law. It's what we use to say we need to have a system in place where everyone can have a fair trial, a fair process. And before we, as a government or a society, take away anyone's life or property or liberty, we have to give them these chances, these opportunities. So, for example, having a jury trial for any felony, that's part of your due process rights. There's some of these things that we've kind of gone over in the past, which would be, or in the next amendment, the speedy trial provisions. They can't just throw you in jail for a year before they charge you with anything. That would violate not just the Sixth Amendment, but also due process. So, and it goes on to talk about, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So basically what it's saying is the government can't just come in and take your stuff or take your freedom without following the rules. And you have to have a chance, an opportunity to argue against it and say why the government shouldn't be allowed to take that from you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the last part with just compensation. So that's actually, that leads to the eminent domain portions of the law. So eminent domain, have you ever heard that phrase?
I think so.
Have you ever heard of the Little Pink House?
Well, I read like a kid's version, Tuttle Twins.
Yep.
It was their grandma.
Right.
In the pink house.
Yep. So that was kind of a kid version of, one of these cases that made it to the Supreme Court, where the government was taking someone's private property, and in this case, the controversy was whether it was for public use or not. So before this case, it was sort of a long-standing acknowledgement that if the utility company has to put up power lines, if the government needed space for a school or a new police department or even like a hospital, things like that, and there's just no other way to get the land, or building roads, then they could take it through this process called eminent domain. Now, the way it works is they have to pay you for the land that they're taking, and you have the right to challenge the valuation and things like that and get an appraisal done, and all those things. But the idea of what is public use really to came to a head in this Kelo v. New London case. I forget the exact year, around 2004, 2005, maybe. And they took these people's houses for a private developer, right? So when we think of public or private, really it's is it the government or some other normal person,
Like
a private business, like a Walmart or a Target or a random business.
in this, it was like an energy power plant, or actually, no, I think it
Yeah,
was
so yeah, it wouldn't be a power plant. So, yeah, maybe some sort of manufacturing, things like that. In Kelo v. New London, it was supposed to be this business development park. It was supposed to have high-end hotels and things like that. And there was, I think, a biotech company or something that was going to go in. Turns out none of that ever actually happened. But the way they justified it as being for public use was they said, well, that's going to, we're going to be able to collect more taxes from this property, because you can tax a $10 million business property more than you can tax a bunch of houses that combined value is $3 million or whatever it is. They justified it using that, and the Supreme Court allowed it. They said if the state can articulate a public use, a public benefit, then they can take it. A lot of states push back on that. I get equally as frustrated with both sides of the aisle, so to speak, the Republicans and Democrats. Both of them seem to like to use it whenever it's convenient to them. It does seem like this is one of those rights that is on shaky ground. There doesn't seem to be much of an appetite to give back those rights to the people, which is unfortunate, because it's if it's your land, the government shouldn't be able to come in and just take it for whatever they think it should be used for, because there's almost always going to be a higher and better use that you can justify taking land for.
Mhm.
If it's a farm, well, you could build housing and tax it more. If it's a small business, you could take it away and put a big business. There's always going to be something that you could justify taking someone's property with, if that's the criteria. So, any questions about the Fifth Amendment? There's a lot packed in there.
Not really.
Good. So, big picture is Fifth Amendment. The government can't just take away our rights and our freedoms without following certain due process rules.